expecting that you're going to say that there were fewer people coming out of rural areas who actually truly... Sorry, I was expecting that you'd say there'd be less people who came out of the country and truly believed in water saving and did cut down their water usage through their tanks relative to the percentage of people who put in the tanks for ego-driven reasons and actually didn't save that much water.
Yeah, well, we can't actually, in the data, we can't actually, we don't have numbers on these. So this is an in-depth sample, a subsample of a very much larger data set, and this is our best interpretation of what's actually going on there. So,
that was the 20 families.
no, that's a different study, but yeah, it was about that number of in-depth ones. And but these themes of city and country have come up in other research that we've done, that people who've grown up in the country have or people who've had to depend on water tanks for their only water supply have very strong ethic of wanting to repeat that in a city context. So I can't really tell you the breakdown of in a statistically meaningful way. Like in that sample, it was about half and half water users compared to water savers, but we're not claiming that's a statistically representative sample. The bigger sample is, but this particular one is an interpretation of what's going on in that.
It does tend to imply to me that if you wanted to put in some of these green policies, that you do it by promoting emotional type reasons rather than practical type reasons. As in, not saving water out of guilt and responsibility, but saving water out of it's mine, saving electricity out of it's my electricity, saving waste miles or food miles or whatever out of some other sort of emotional type thing, not the actual true belief type reasons.
Yeah, anyone else want to comment on that?
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Can you use the microphone and just make sure the people at the back can hear?
Okay. I just wanted to know what role was grey water looked at in this, because I guess the supply of grey water is much more regular, and you get that in times of drought when you won't be getting your rainwater tank filled up so much. And does that play into the role of dirty water, clean water use?
Candice didn't look at grey water in this particular study, but we did have some, where's Gordon? We did have some numbers of grey water in the bigger survey. Do you remember offhand? It was a very, very tiny percentage of households who had grey water connections. If we talk about informal grey water, so, you know, running the washing machine onto the lawn and so on, certainly in other research we've done in the backyard research we did a few years ago, which was right at the start of the drought, that was quite a very widespread practice. Whether it correlates with having a tank or not having a tank and other parts of your water consumption, we don't actually know. So there's plenty more research projects for students to do.
How much do you think the Sydney water policy of only allowing water tanks to be connected to washing machines and toilets and not showers or any other part of the household feeds into this dirty water image?
Well, I only have a gut reaction, but I think there's other things going on, and I'll talk from personal experience now, having put in a tank. The extra set of infrastructure around the pumps that you need, depending where your tank is in relation to your house and so on, it's actually a more infrastructurally complicated enterprise than most of us realise when we start the process. So if you're retrofitting a house, often those things don't work. So it's another signal that you have to be really, really motivated to do this, and to have you know, broad uptake across the population is another set of issues. So it might be the sort of thing you do when you're doing a major renovation or a major rebuild, when you're doing all the infrastructure anyway, but in terms of putting stuff in, I'm not sure. But the other thing I will say there is that I think there's a very strong agency of the drought in all this process. So people were really sensitised to the drought. I mean, even in Illawarra, where we didn't feel it as badly as other areas like Melbourne, for example, where the whole city sort of just shriveled up. But it was you know, people could see what was happening, and so I think that that very strong connection to what's happening is an important part of the link. Now the question then is, okay, it's been raining, what are we all doing? And is that a problem? Should we change our practices to be flexible when we have more abundant water, and then go back to living more frugally? Or are these good habits that we should hang on to forever and not change? I think there's some quite interesting questions there about, you know, are we on a permanent diet, or are we able to be more flexible? And particularly as we go into sort of debates about climate change adaptation, these will become more regular things to think about.
Actually, my question relates to that a bit. Given you're talking about the Illawarra, was there any looking at or capturing of views about the fact that there's not much public infrastructure to capture stormwater runoff? And so, you know, in years when, as you say, talking about drought, but in fact, you know, the Illawarra does receive rains, we see it just rolling out, and there's not much discussion about those sorts of infrastructures being sort of built. Does that contribute to people's sense that, well, the public sector isn't working at saving water, and why should individuals?
I couldn't tell you without going back into the data about the stormwater capture and so on. But I think that thing about the public sector's not saving water, therefore why should I? I think people's attitude is different in that than it is to switching off lights and things. I think there is, and maybe it was because of, this is a bit impressionistic now, but if I'm thinking of the various studies that we've done over the last 10 years that relate to drought-connected things, my sense is people had a very strong ethic of wanting to save water for its own sake, most people. So, you know, it's uneven across the population, but there is this quite strong ethic that was perhaps widespread across the community for the first time. Depends how old you are, I suppose, how far you can go back in that. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm from Brisbane, and during the drought we all got sent these 3-minute shower timers, you know, so we had to stick them in the bathroom and press, you know, go, and we'd have 3 minutes, and everyone in Brisbane had these timers. And everyone that I was going to university with at the time, we didn't live far from a Coca-Cola factory, and so in terms of our responsibility, it was severely affected by the fact that the Coca-Cola company used far more water. And it raised the question of like corporate social responsibility. Why should we have a 3-minute shower, you know, and risk being dirty when they could just produce less Coke? So I wonder whether you considered, you know, let's save our teeth, right? So I wonder whether you considered that element of corporate social responsibility with mass water users, with households who really use a very small percentage of the overall water.
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue. Households are not that small. In the Sydney area, they're 70% of the total water. But I certainly agree that, and this was part of the introduction, that it's not all about households doing all the work and the corporate sector not doing their share. But I think there's plenty of examples as well where businesses have cut down their water usage quite a lot in the drought. I don't know about Coca-Cola. So yeah, I take your point certainly. Someone want to comment on that? Yep.
Yeah, just on that theme, because we have got recycled water here now, BlueScope now use, is there any correlation in the figures between what we don't use now from back then to what the household savings were and the water tanks have been put in? So has there been any information there as well? Because I think we're leading Australia in using recycled water there. This is the environment.
We haven't done anything on that, but yeah, there could be interesting ways to connect different bits of data on that. Yeah, so I can't really answer that question.
We've got time for one more question.
I was wondering if during the study you identified any promising avenues to save water that you might not have expected with this kind of end?
Well, not in this study, but in our work in the backyard study that we did before, what we found was, and this is people, we didn't go into research water, we were researching people's relationship with their gardens. And we found a huge range of informal vernacular practices that people were undertaking inside the house to save water, to save their gardens. So, you know, we use the metaphor or the motif, if you like, of the bucket in the shower, and many of you will have had the bucket in the shower during that time. So these are lots of little things, and they're probably all the things that people would be familiar with and know about. The bucket in the shower, the tub for washing the veggies in the sink, and then you throw your veggie water on the garden. And which doesn't answer your question completely, but it does raise up another thing, which is that often separate houses and gardens are seen to be environmental villains compared to apartment-style living. But in fact, the data shows that the per capita usage of water in separate houses and gardens is no higher. And one of our arguments was that because people were so passionate about their gardens, they were working really hard to save water inside the house to save the garden. But that's a different study, so I'm probably mixing my messages here. Sorry, I just meant to tell you there's some ads for our publications.
So if everyone could thank Leslie for sharing her work with us tonight. And just before we go, I'd like to throw to Chris Gibson, who is going to say a few words and possibly launch something.
Just very quickly, you can tell, I think, from the questions that actually water is something that people like to discuss, and there's different opinions, and it's a talking point. And one of the things that in the research centre that we have, that Leslie is in charge of, we've recently just started a discussion paper series, which is about facilitating discussion. And one of the things that we wanted to do tonight was basically to launch that, so I hereby launch our discussion papers, and the first of those is by Leslie, talking about urban water. So in a way, if you're interested in the things that you heard and that we discussed tonight, you can grab a copy of the first of those discussion papers here down the front, and it has more of the information and the data and so on in there for you. The second paper in the series is also here as well, and it's by Andrew Warren, who's sitting over here, who's an expert on the surfboard industry in Wollongong. So if you want to learn about the surfboard industry, it's all here too in discussion paper number 2. So they're down here, down the front for you to take away, and they're also downloadable online. And there'll be more of these to come over the coming years. So help yourself with these discussion papers, and thank you very much for being part of the discussion tonight. And and we're on Facebook, so you all have to like us on Facebook. Social media sites.
Everyone likes trees here, I'm guessing. On Tuesday night at Corrimal Library, there's a Wollongong Native Trees book launch for the new edition. The one hasn't been written since '82, and it's got all colour photos. You probably already know about it, I'm hoping. Has anyone heard about it already? Is anyone planning to go? Okay, anyway, it's going to be fantastic. There's 25 new species listed, and they're partly because there's been new classifications and new ones found in this region. And
Sorry, when is that?
When is
When is it?
5:30, Tuesday, Corrimal Library.
Thanks everyone. Trivia's on.